Tonight on PrimeTime, tens of billions of euros in Russian state assets remain frozen across the EU as Ukraine faces mounting financial strain and US support slows. Brussels is exploring whether that money can be unlocked to fund Kyiv, a move that tests law, unity, and Europe's global credibility. Frozen money, urgent war, but who pays? Good evening. Well, the idea sounds simple, doesn't it? Even compelling. Use immobilized Russian assets to help Ukraine survive the next phase of this war. But the reality is far more complex. These funds do, in fact, belong largely to Russia's central bank, despite being held inside Europe's financial system. Turning them into support for Kyiv then raises legal risks, political divisions, and fears of setting a global precedent. Some EU states worry they could be left carrying the bill, while others argue hesitation itself carries a cost. Tonight, we examine the plan, the pushback, and what this moment could mean for Europe's power and its principles going forward. First, let's take a look at this explainer.
Europe is facing a critical test. Tens of billions of euros in Russian assets have been frozen across the continent since Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. Now, with US financial support tapering and Kyiv edging closer to a funding crunch, the European Union is exploring a bold plan to unlock this frozen cash to support Ukraine's government and military.
Russian frozen assets are mainly assets which belong to the Russian central bank. While there are other assets owned by Russian companies and individuals, some of them are sanctioned, some of them are not, but here we are talking about Russian sovereign assets.
Europe's idea is to use this money as collateral to issue so-called reparation bonds, zero-interest instruments guaranteed by the EU and member states. The stakes are enormous. Ukraine needs around 135 billion euros over the next 2 years, split between government spending and defense. With US support dwindling, Europe must fill the gap or risk Kyiv running out of resources just as Russia continues to make gains on the battlefield.
Well, the problem is that the Americans stopped bankrolling Ukraine. And the whole idea now is that Europe must shoulder the bill. Without the European money or without the European financial guarantees, Ukraine would not be able to survive financially because the IMF is not prepared to lend money to Ukraine without the European guarantees. Ukrainian budget runs a huge deficit, and we are not even mentioning the needs of the army.
But there are major hurdles. Belgium, where most of the frozen assets are held, fears legal retaliation if Russia challenges the plan.
It is not acceptable to use the money and leave us alone facing the risks. The proposed reparations loan is clearly not a preferred choice. In the even member states wish to go in that direction.
The European Central Bank has also refused to backstop the bonds, citing its mandate, leaving the EU scrambling to design a solution that spreads risk fairly among member states. Merz has called on EU members to act together, warning that failing to unlock the assets could weaken Europe's ability to respond in the years ahead. The coming weeks could determine not just Ukraine's survival, but the EU's credibility on the global stage.
European Union foreign ministers have ended their final Foreign Affairs Council of 2025 in Brussels without agreeing yet on using frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine. Now, Italy, Malta and Bulgaria opposed the plan, while Hungary and Slovakia rejected it outright. Hungary's foreign minister warned it could provoke Russia and prolong the conflict. The Czech Prime Minister said his country would not take on financial risks. Now, EU leaders are expected to revisit the issue at the European Council this week, as Russia warns that any use of its assets without consent would be illegal. Well, my guest to discuss this tonight is Cüneyt Dirijan, a professor of economy and accounting and finance management department at the head of Istanbul Erel University. Cüneyt, it's very good to see you again on the show. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Freezing Russian reserves, that's one thing, isn't it? But just deciding to use them in some way in order to make money for a country's enemy, is that really the quickest way to help Kyiv? And also, I have to ask you, is it legal? Is it even moral? Couldn't you even interpret this as just stealing?
Yeah, thanks for inviting me first, and then let me remind you one other thing. The European Union in general, they are freezing these assets in every 6 months. In order to bypass this voting system or the approval of the membership countries, they they make it unlimited, okay? So this is not something new, let me say. And let me start first with the famous quote of Atatürk, the founder of the modern Turkey, peace at home, peace at world. And secondly, let me remind one other thing. The Orthodox Patriarch in Istanbul is the first ranked among the Russian and the Ukraine church. So whatever the solution is laid down in Turkey for many reasons, and like in Istanbul gathering previously before. So there was a consensus in Istanbul, as you may remember, until UK and the European Union involved for doing the vice versa. So let me start first of all by reminding that type of, let me say, headlines. Your question, the only solution for, in my opinion, and I think for every, let me say, individual around the world, the only solution laid down in the is laid down in making the peace deal. So the short answer to stop the war and to stop the, let me say, the disputes is the only solution for every path, for every country. So European Union and United States, they are no longer supporting Ukraine. So they have some budget problems, etc. So making a peace deal like Mr. Trump proposed, I think, is the only solution. The details could be discussed, but the only solution for me, instead of freezing assets or making sanctions, etc., obviously, we can also see that it will not stop Russia, because this is a red line crossing for Russia for many reasons. So you cannot stop Russia by doing that type of things. And let me give you some also other figures. When we talk about 210 billion euros, approximately euros, let me say, frozen asset, we are talking about approximately the GDP of Portugal, Greece, let me say, Finland, Czechia, Romania, Bulgaria, and even Hungary. So we are talking a huge amount. So it is not easy to do so. As you asked me before in your question, it will create also more conflict in the futures. So the only solution for me, instead of doing that type of sanctions, etc., to try to make a peace deal among these two countries.
That's a very good point, that actually if a peace deal happens quickly, which is what everybody wants, then it renders these conversations to some degree obsolete. And we do know, don't we, as we heard in the report, that the US now has stopped bankrolling Ukraine. How strong is the argument then that this really is the only solution to prevent European taxpayers from shouldering the burden in a more direct fashion?
First of all, let me remind you also that France has a big budget deficit problem. Together with Germany and United Kingdom, they have huge problems on the infrastructural part as well as in their GDP growth. But apart from that, let me remind you also some figures. For example, the military spending of Russia. The military spending of Russia is 3 times more than Ukraine. And also the GDP of Russia is still, let me say, steady together with the inflation. But they don't have any problem on the, let me say, for example, trade part. They have trade surplus still. They don't have any unemployment problems. And foreign exchange reserves, as well as their foreign exchange reserves in their central bank, is very strong still. Whether you do something else, whether you freeze all the assets or whether you put sanctions, it cannot stop Russia because, as I tried to mention, it is a red line crossing for Russia for every reason. So they don't want to lose that war and they don't want to stop in Ukraine case. It could be different maybe in somewhere else, but for the Ukraine, it is, I think, their red line. So for that reason, when we look at the budget problems and the other fiscal problems of European Union, they are also depending, the European Union also, they are heavily depending also the energy part. It will be more problematic for the European, let me say, citizens before the Russian citizens. So remember that European Union once it has been established as a coal union. So they are heavily depending on the energy side. So after that, they are shifted to a trade and fiscal, let me say, union against the US dollar dominance, against the United States, let me say, economy. So it won't be logical for them due to the many, let me say, issues, problems, and conflicts. In the first rank, the judicial, let me say, type of problem. So it will be a little bit compelling, and they are also assuming that Russia will lose that war. But yes, it could be. But in general, if Russia wins, that could be the most likelihood scenario. If Russia wins, there will be more conflicts in the future because of the war compensation. So that's not the only problem or issue of today. That will be also the problem of tomorrow. So to stop the war, I think, is the only solution.
It's a very interesting point you make there, because of course there will be all sorts of knock-on residual economic and political aspects that will need thought and resolution. And almost because of that, do you think this could be a dangerous move? Because once this line is crossed, if the EU does decide it can leverage central bank reserves, do you not think that sets a pretty dangerous precedent for the future, in that the EU is saying that any time it decides it wants to, it can sort of reach in and tinker with sovereign assets? If you're a country that it decides it doesn't like what you're doing at that moment.
Yeah, obviously, I think the answer is laying down in the question. I think critical question is that will you keep your assets or your fortune in such a scenario in any central bank in Europe or in any custodian services in Europe? That's the, I think, main point. So the answer is obviously yes, it could be a dangerous, let me say, situation for every investors around the world. And this is not the only case, not because of the sanctions or freezing the assets of the Russian sovereign bonds, etc., FX reserves, etc. Remember the merger of UBS and Credit Suisse. So the let me say, two biggest European commercial banks, they merged, they belong together to these two biggest banks without any consent or without any, let me say, acceptance of their investors, or without doing any company general assembly. Just during a weekend they did it. And apart from that, in the last month, for example, in Netherlands, we have seen that based on the Goods Availability Act, they intervene in a China chipmaker company in Netherlands. So those type of, I think, let me say, examples show us that Europe is not a safe haven anymore for many reasons. And not only because we have an expansion of the risk, for example, of war, because of that type of financial, let me say, issues. And also, the European assets and also the euro area is becoming much more riskier for investors to make investments for that type of, let me say, example. So, and the other thing, the frozen assets of Russia is now, in general, mostly you can see it under the Euroclear company. This is the biggest, let me say, custodian and the settlement company. And it is based in Belgium, in Brussels, which means it is also nearby of the NATO and also the European Union and the European Council. So I want to come again the first, let me say, question. Will you keep your assets in such scenario anymore from now on if you see that type of, let me say, examples of, let me say, problems?
It's very interesting, isn't it? Because what do you think this potentially does in terms of confidence? Do you think this might almost have a compounding effect on confidence? Because we've already seen it, as you've already mentioned, this stagnation of growth across EU countries, partly at least due to bureaucracy, partly at least due to the way that things are being managed. If you add to that a sense of panic, almost, a sense that we'll just come up with some idea and, you know, I mean, it's an economic axiom, isn't it, that one thing that markets hate is uncertainty, a lack of predictability. Do you think there's a danger this could dramatically affect medium-term confidence in the Eurozone as a whole?
Yeah, Europe in general, they have huge problems. First of all, population. Second one, economic growth. It was inflation before, after COVID, and also trust among each other countries because of the fiscal problems among, let me say, Italy, Hungary, and with the remaining part of the European Union. And apart from that, for example, they have huge budget problems, and also after the Brexit, they have other disputes between UK and European Union. So those type of problems, and also they have to invest heavily in their infrastructures. For example, in their health system, in their education system, in their, let me say, internet system, in their, let me say, transportation. So they have to make it. Remember last year there was a report prepared by the ex, let me say, president of European Central Bank, Mr. Draghi, the ex prime minister of Italy. Europe needs approximately 400 billions of euro in order to make that type of those heavily, let me say, investments and needs. So obviously, the answer for your question, yes, obviously this could create a problem for, let me say, Europe and the euro area in general, because it will also decrease the confidence towards euro. Yes, today, for example, because of many reasons, because of the tariffs, etc., because of the trade wars, there is a shift from United States dollars towards, for example, euro. But in the long run, there will be a confidence problem for the euro. So as a, let me say, reserve money. Apart from that, there are still, let me say, shifts from central banks going through the gold, for example. So instead of choosing the euro or the United States dollars or their bonds, their government bonds, the central banks are heavily investing in the last years to gold. So we can clearly see it in the World Gold Council, let me say, figures. So central banks also are getting away from that type of, let me say, reserves money and so on. So and also this weekend, the German Prime Minister also said that the Pax Americana is over. So it means that all the pacts and agreements made before are now under consideration. It means that. And also, this is the end of this is, let me say, another saying that the neoliberalism and also the globalism now ends. So it means that a new world or a new, let me say, economic understanding is now trying to be established. So in that scenario, you should question everything, including European Union and the Euro as well. Not only, let me say, Chinese renminbi or United States dollars, you should question everything. So it will be more fundamentalist and more protectionism also will come after. So we have seen that in the COVID, let me say, period. For example, the France stopped all the, let me say, aid towards Czechia, for example. So protectionism also will come among also the European countries as well. So if you see that scenario, such scenarios, so you will question everything, I think.
Professor, question everything. That's a great mantra to end on. We thank you very much indeed for your analysis, for joining us on the show. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. See you soon.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the top business stories of the day with Andy Mioch. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Prime Time. Now, Andy Mioch is here with all your latest business news. Andy, what is on the agenda tonight?
Well, Guy, tonight we'll be talking stock exchanges, that Trump BBC lawsuit, autos, and there's also some news out of the smart vacuum and ice cream industries as well. So let's have a look. First up, NASDAQ is seeking regulatory approval to extend its trading hours to 23 hours during the work week, adding a new session to accommodate growing investor demand for round-the-clock trading.
NASDAQ, one of the world's largest exchanges that is home to tech companies, Nvidia, Apple and Amazon, is looking for regulatory approval to extend trading hours on its stock venues to 23 hours during the work week. The firm asked the US Securities and Exchange Commission for permission to add an additional trading session from 9 p.m. to 4 a.m. Eastern Time, according to a filing on Monday. That would be on top of the pre-market, regular and post-market hours it already operates, the firm said. Investor demand for non-stop trading in US stocks has surged in recent years, prompting regulators to introduce new rules and green light proposals from major exchanges to enable trading beyond normal market hours. The US stock market represents almost 2/3 of the market value of listed companies globally, while total foreign holdings of US equities reached $17 trillion last year, according to data compiled by NASDAQ. Other exchanges have also outlined their own path to extending trading hours on their venues, including the New York Stock Exchange, which plans to offer trading 22 hours on weekdays. That proposal got initial approval from the SEC in February, pending updates to the market's data feed. Venues that allow extended stock trading have split Wall Street. Proponents say investors both in the US and overseas want the ability to access and react to stocks outside of US market hours. Opponents have warned that the quality of trading may suffer from lower volume, which can make pricing less precise.
A coalition of European app developers and consumer groups has called on Brussels to enforce laws against Apple, arguing that the company's fee structure disadvantages European developers compared to their US counterparts.
A coalition of 20 app developers and consumer groups on Tuesday called upon European regulators to enforce EU laws against Apple. They say the company's fee structure unfairly disadvantages European developers compared to their US rivals and follows a recent court decision in the United States. The EU's Digital Markets Act mandates that large tech platforms labelled gatekeepers facilitate in-app transactions outside their ecosystem at no charge. The coalition's appeal reflects concerns over a disparity following a US court ruling that restricts Apple's ability to impose fees on external transactions. The European Commission earlier this year fined Apple $588 million for breaching the DMA by obstructing developers from guiding users to alternative payment methods. In response to the EU ruling, Apple revised its terms. The Coalition for Apps Fairness represents firms such as Deezer and Proton. It argues these revised fees still violate DMA stipulations and says that US developers benefit from more favourable terms after the court decision.
In the media landscape, the BBC has announced it will defend a $10 billion defamation lawsuit filed by US President Donald Trump related to a documentary that edited a speech he gave before the Capitol riot on January 6th of 2021.
The BBC said Tuesday it would fight a $10 billion lawsuit brought by US President Donald Trump against the British broadcaster over a documentary that edited his 2021 speech ahead of the US Capitol riot. The lawsuit, filed in federal court in Miami, seeks damages in an amount not less than $5 billion for each of 2 counts against the British broadcaster for alleged defamation and violation of the Florida Deceptive and Unfair Trade Practices Act. The video that triggered the lawsuit spliced together 2 separate sections of Trump's speech on January 6, 2021, in a way that made it appear he explicitly urged supporters to attack the Capitol, where lawmakers were certifying Joe Biden's 2020 election win. The lawsuit comes as the UK government on Tuesday launched the politically sensitive review of the BBC's Royal Charter, which outlines the corporation's funding and governance and needs to be renewed in 2027. The BBC faced a period of turmoil last month after a media report brought renewed attention to the edited clip. The scandal led the BBC Director General and the organisation's top news executive to resign. The BBC has denied Trump's claims of legal defamation, though BBC Chairman Samir Shah has sent Trump a letter of apology.
On to the auto industry. Ford is planning to take a $19.5 billion write-down and discontinue several electric vehicle models. The car maker is shifting much of its focus to expanding conventional gas models as well as hybrid vehicles in an effort to better match the preferences of American car buyers.
Ford Motor said on Monday it will take a $19.5 billion write-down and is killing several electric vehicle models in the most dramatic example yet of the auto industry's retreat from battery-powered models in response to the Trump administration's policies and weakening EV demand. The Michigan-based company said it will stop making the F-150 Lightning in its electric vehicle form, but will pivot to producing an extended-range electric model, a version of a hybrid vehicle called an EREV, which uses a gas-powered generator to recharge the battery. The company is also scrapping a next-generation electric truck, codenamed the T3, as well as planned electric commercial vans. Instead, Ford said it will pivot hard into gas and hybrid models and eventually hire thousands of workers, even though there will be some layoffs at a jointly owned Kentucky battery plant in the near term. The company expects its global mix of hybrids, extended-range EVs and pure EVs to reach 50% by 2030 from 17% today. Ford will spread out the write-down, taken primarily in the fourth quarter and continuing through next year and into 2027, the company said. About $8.5 billion is related to cancelling planned EV models. Around $6 billion is tied to the dissolution of a battery joint venture with South Korea's SK On, and $5 billion on what Ford called program-related expenses. Ford's shift reflects the auto industry's response to waning demand for battery-powered models after car companies plowed hundreds of billions of dollars into EV investments early this decade. The outlook for electrics dimmed significantly this year as US President Donald Trump's policies yanked federal support for EVs and eased tailpipe emissions rules, which could encourage car makers to sell more gas-powered cars. US sales of electric vehicles fell about 40% in November, following the September 30th expiration of a $7,500 consumer tax credit, which had been in place for more than 15 years to stoke demand. The Trump administration also included in the massive tax and spending bill that passed in July a freeze on fines that automakers pay for violating fuel economy regulations.
In the world of smart appliances, iRobot, the maker of the Roomba vacuum, has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy and will be acquired by its Chinese manufacturer. The company said it doesn't expect the bankruptcy to affect its product support or supply chain.
iRobot, the maker of the Roomba vacuum, has filed for bankruptcy and will be taken over by its Chinese manufacturer in a deal that wipes out shareholders. iRobot's stock plummeted more than 70% on Monday after the Chapter 11 bankruptcy filing. It comes after months of financial strain from fierce competition and new US tariffs. iRobot took in about $682 million in revenue last year, but profits were squeezed by rivals like China's Ecovacs Robotics. The Massachusetts-based company remains dominant in key markets, including the US and Japan, but has had to slash prices and spend heavily on tech upgrades to keep pace, according to the bankruptcy filing. Adding to the pressure is a 46% tariff on imports from Vietnam, where iRobot makes vacuums for the US market. That tariff alone cost the company $23 million this year. iRobot was once a buyout target of Amazon's, but that deal collapsed after a European probe. Now, with more than $260 million in debt, iRobot will be acquired by Paisea Robotics, its main manufacturer. Founded in 1990 by 3 MIT roboticists, iRobot was valued at roughly $3.5 billion as recently as 2021, driven by pandemic-fueled demand. It is now worth around $140 million, according to data compiled by LSEG. iRobot said the bankruptcy is not expected to disrupt its apps, supply chain relationships, or product support.
And finally, for a scoop of news from the ice cream industry, Ben & Jerry's has removed the chair of its independent board as part of new governance measures, introducing 9-year term limits for board members.
Ben & Jerry's has ousted the chair of its independent board as part of new governance practices introduced by the Vermont-based ice cream brand on Monday that include 9-year term limits for board members. Anuradha Mittal, who joined the Ben & Jerry's board in 2007, serving as chair since 2018, said this month she had no plans to resign under pressure from the then Ben & Jerry's owner Unilever, calling efforts to remove her an attempt by Unilever to undermine the authority of the board itself. The Cherry Garcia ice cream maker is now owned by the Magnum Ice Cream Company, after a spin-off from Unilever last week that created the world's largest standalone ice cream company, commanding around a fifth of the $87 billion global market. Ben & Jerry's, whose 2000 merger agreement with Unilever created an independent board and preserved the brand's social mission and charitable work, said in a statement that any director who has served more than 9 years on the board would not be eligible for annual re-election in 2026. Ben & Jerry's has been at odds with its parent company since at least 2021, when it said it would stop selling in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Ben & Jerry's co-founder Ben Cohen said the 3 directors had served the company with integrity and courage. Magnum said it fully supported the steps Ben & Jerry's was taking to enhance board governance.
And that is a wrap on the business brief for tonight. Back to you, Guy.
Andy, I've actually been to that factory in Vermont, and it's a fascinating place, but they've always had a very uneasy relationship with their corporate owners, since right back to the year 2000. Let's hope that the new Magnum relationship will be a bit more positive. It's very interesting indeed. Thank you. Okay, after the break, we take a look at Washington's security proposal for Ukraine, Europe's expected role, and why key divisions and Moscow's silence still complicate the path ahead. Please stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching PrimeTime. The United States is offering NATO-style security guarantees for Ukraine, with Europe expected to lead a multinational force under the latest peace proposal. But deep divisions remain over territorial concessions, and despite cautious optimism in European capitals, Moscow has yet to respond. Here's the latest.
European leaders have closed ranks in Berlin, setting out what they say must come before any peace deal with Russia. In a joint statement after the talks, leaders from across Europe and the European Union agreed that territorial questions can only be addressed once Ukraine has firm security guarantees. Central to that vision is a European-led multinational peacekeeping force backed by willing nations and coordinated with the United States. The plan would allow Kyiv to maintain a large standing army, around 800,000 troops, and would see European forces helping to secure the country's airspace and maritime routes while supporting the rebuilding of its military. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen made clear that Ukraine alone must decide its future.
Decisions on territories are for Ukraine to take, and Ukraine alone. Likewise, issues affecting the European Union and NATO will be discussed among the European Union and NATO members. In short, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, nothing about the European Union without the European Union, nothing about NATO without NATO.
She also said Europe was prepared to shoulder much of the financial burden, proposing that the European Union cover around 2/3 of Ukraine's financing needs for the next 2 years, roughly 90 billion euros, and stressing that European support would continue for as long as necessary. US President Donald Trump, speaking separately, said the talks had brought the sides closer together.
But we're getting closer. We're having tremendous support from European leaders. They want to get it ended also. And at this moment, Russia wants to get it ended. The problem is they'll want to get it ended, and then all of a sudden they won't. And Ukraine will want to get it ended, and all of a sudden they won't. So we have to get them on the same page. But I think that's working along. Very good talk.
Despite the progress, several sticking points remain unresolved. US negotiators are pressing Ukraine to withdraw forces from parts of eastern Donetsk, a concession Kyiv has repeatedly described as deeply painful. Russia has yet to signal any willingness to compromise, leaving territorial issues a major obstacle.
Well, joining me now is Bekia İlhan, a political analyst working at the Turkey Research Foundation based in Ankara. Mr. İlhan, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Primetime. Let's begin with the offer itself then. How significant do you think this US proposal is to extend NATO-style security guarantees to Ukraine, but without obviously full alliance membership?
Yeah, I would say I'm not sure if this is a realistic offer, because it's clear that it will get a clear no from the Russian side, because Russians have long been stating that they will never accept any kind of idea or security framework that have Ukraine in NATO, or any idea that contains NATO-like security arrangement for Ukraine, I would say. So two things are important for the Russians at this point, I would say. One is about territory, and the second is about the NATO and NATO-like security arrangement. So I think even if it's not a realistic offer from the West or from the United States, I would say, it's strategic, I would say, because it's more than like a bargaining tactic, I would say, because the United States is trying to keep the bar higher as much as possible, so that it can, extract some concessions from the Russian side, I would say. But like I said, even if it's not a realistic plan, even if it does not contain any kind of pathway to lasting peace or a lasting ceasefire, I would say, it's a bargaining tactic, it's a delaying tactic from the Western side. And as I said, the Russians will not likely accept any idea that contains any idea that keeps the Ukraine in NATO, I would say.
Now, Europe clearly wants to play a leadership role, or the EU rather wants to play a leadership role. If Europe is expected to lead some kind of multinational force, what would that mean in practical terms for political responsibility, but also for long-term military commitment?
Well, again, I have my doubts regarding the, long-term European commitment to, about Ukrainian security. I would say two things are important at this point. One is about military capacity, and the second one is about political willingness, which is closely related to societal cost of keeping such a commitment alive in the long term, I would say. Looking at the military capacity, I would say European countries, even major European countries like Germany and France, they have a long way to achieve a sustainable or to achieve a competitive military power against the Russian military power without the United States, I would say. Even if looking at the other, minor European countries, I would say the situation is, is not is the same. I would say, and on the other hand, looking at the societal cost, I would say I'm not sure if the European public or the European people, will accept such a long-term commitments from their governments, because at the end of the day, of course, we are talking about the Europe as a continent. But itself right now is not a unified front, I would say, because there is a divide, I would say, between the Eastern European countries and the Western European countries. Of course, the Eastern European countries feels the Russian threat very closely, very harshly. They have also their historical reasons for that. It's okay. But on the other hand, looking at the Central European countries and the Western European countries, they do not feel that threat as the same way with the Eastern European countries, I would say. So at the end of the day, even if the Eastern European people, accept such a, commitment, I would say, I'm not sure in the long term the Central or the Western European people or the public opinion will accept such an idea, and also it will affect the governmental decision regarding the long-term security commitments for Ukraine, I would say.
That's a very good point to bring the public and public perception into this, because if you look at this framework, its supporters say that it could stabilise the conflict, point to its advantages. But recently, with a lot of rhetoric, we've heard things like, well, we're 90% there, we're almost there. But if that final 10% contains all the most difficult elements, if territory and territorial concessions still aren't resolved, then isn't it just sort of fairly meaningless, just sort of waffle, sleight of hand almost, that the public's getting a bit sick of listening to?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, just looking at the table, I would say the territorial aspect of the negotiations is the most important one. The most important one, I would say, the most important topic is territorial, aspect. I would say, plus a security framework for Ukraine. I would say, like I said, the Russians will never accept any kind of, territorial concessions from their own, because they have already invaded eastern side of the Ukrainian territory, like Luhansk, Donetsk, and also Crimea as well, and they will never accept any proposal, that predicts any kind of territorial concessions from Russia. And on the other hand, I would say the Ukrainian side or the Western side think that the territorial matters should be discussed later in the long term, I would say. They think that it's a matter of a post-ceasefire process. It's a matter of ceasefire process, I would say. But on the other hand, the Russians believe that the territorial concessions or territorial aspects of the agreement should be discussed in the first phase of the negotiations. So I think, there is a, also there is also a disagreement about time order of the things from the both sides. I would say they even do not agree on the timing or the order of things. I would say at this point. So that's why I think that a realistic path for peace or realistic path for a ceasefire is not likely at this point. All we have seen is just a delaying tactics from the European side, I would say, because there is a possibility of a rapprochement between the Russians and the United States, and it creates a panic, anxiety on the European countries, so that they feel or they are compelled to intervene themselves in the process, so that they can try to delay a real agreement, as best as they can, so that Trump administration, change its mind in the long term. So that's why I think that a clear path for peace is not likely at this point, at this moment, I would say.
Let's just talk about NATO for a minute, Mr. Ilham. The Secretary General's been very keen to promote the strength of NATO, to kibosh any sense that NATO is diminished in any way. But when you offer security guarantees that are NATO-like, but outside of NATO, does that not diminish NATO itself?
Yeah, for sure, it will diminish, or it will weaken the credibility of the alliance, I would say. First of all, we need to clarify that NATO is the most important and the strongest military alliance in the modern history, I would say. So what makes NATO important is, Article 5, because Article 5 presents a very clear red line, and that red line, that the idea of one for all for one idea, strengthens NATO's deterrence posture, I would say. But if you offer a kind of security agreement or extension to Ukraine outside of Article 5, I would say you would just decrease, or you would just weaken the alliance ability, I would say, because you would create ambiguity. You would blur the red lines, so that and you cannot even affect Russians' future calculations regarding attacking Ukraine or Eastern European country, I would say. So as I said, what makes NATO a credible alliance is a clear, certain red line, which lies in the Article 5, I would say, and any extension, any ambiguous extension to that article, I would say, will eventually diminish the alliance credibility, and it signals weakness to the Russian side, I would say.
Mr. Ilham, we thank you very much for joining us from Ankara. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
After the break, we take a look at how Libya is using a major gas forum in Tripoli to signal renewed energy ambition. Stay with us. Welcome back to Primetime. From years of political uncertainty to renewed energy ambition, Libya is positioning itself once again at the centre of Africa's gas conversation. In Tripoli, senior policymakers, energy executives and international investors have all gathered to assess whether the country can turn its vast natural resources into long-term stability, regional integration and global partnerships. On December the 6th and 7th, the Libya Africa International Gas Forum 2025 brought senior policymakers, energy companies and investors to Tripoli to assess Libya's place in Africa's evolving energy landscape. And A News's Anastasia Lavrina was there. She sent us this report.
Hello, greetings from Tripoli, Libya, a city that stands at the heart of Africa's energy landscape and today hosts one of the continent's key regional gatherings, the Libya Africa International Gas Forum 2025, held on December 6 and 7 under the high patronage of the Libyan Ministry of Oil and Gas and the National Oil Corporation. This forum brings together senior policymakers, major energy companies and international investors to redefine Libya's role in Africa's energy future. Libya, despite years of political turbulence, remains an energy giant. The country holds the largest proven oil reserves and Africa and significant untapped gas potential resources that could transform both its domestic economy and regional energy architecture. At a time when Africa is working to integrate its energy markets and Europe seeks to diversify supply routes, Tripoli is using this platform to signal readiness for renewed cooperation and long-term investment. What makes this gathering unique is the united presence of Libya's leading institutions alongside delegations from across Africa, the Middle East, Europe and global financial organizations. Their focus is clear, evaluating whether Libya can translate its national wealth into modernized infrastructure, reliable export corridors and stable partnership capable of supporting Africa's broader energy ambitions. Throughout the session, speakers emphasized the same priorities: strengthening regulatory frameworks, rebuilding investor confidence and accelerating the adoption of advanced technologies. For Libya, this forum is far more than a business meeting. It is a strategic moment to move from years of fragmentation toward a coherent, forward-looking economic model built on gas and energy diversification. Expectations are high. Many anticipate that the discussions underway may lead to new exploration deals, technology transfers, and investment commitments that bolster Africa's collective energy security. For Libya, tangible outcomes here could mark a turning point, reaffirming its position as a central player in both African and Mediterranean energy networks. Reporting from Tripoli, Anastasia Lavrina, Bahruz Kadyrov, especially for A News.
Okay, we've seen Anastasia there in Tripoli, where energy ambition meets political uncertainty. I'm delighted to say she's now here in the studio with us to break down what's really happening on the ground in Libya. Anastasia, it's very good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Before we start, I'm just curious, but I think everybody will have a different perspective on what they think Libya is like, and particularly Tripoli, depending perhaps on their experience, their travel exposure, their age even. What is Tripoli like from someone that's been there very recently at the moment?
Well, first I would like to say that we were so much excited about this trip, about the filming in Tripoli. There are so many videos on what happened in Libya during and after the first period after the revolution, but there are limited amount of material available on how Libya looks like today. And we were very much excited and very much surprised when we were there for the first time. Because meeting the people, we could see the hope in their eyes. Mm-hmm. They are wish to move forward, but what they like is strong institutions. This is a key problem we face there, but talking with officials, talking with the people, talking with the just ordinary civilians there, we could understand how Libya looks like today. And it's completely different what we had been presented during so much time in the social media.
So the stereotypes no longer apply. You sensed that hope amongst the people and the officials you met. In terms of this path to more stability, where does the current balance of power lie now, do you think?
So, as we understood, there were bigger expectations from the revolution in 2011. But as for now, not geographically, but politically, Libya is divided to the west and to the east. We visited the eastern part in Tripoli. We visited some cities. We spoke with the officials from that part. And we could say that despite the political divisions, economically, it's more or less stable country. Because after speaking with the farmers and with the producers of the dairy products, they told us that their products can easily be delivered to the part controlled by absolutely different government. In Benghazi, for example, without any limitations. And the price for the foods are the same in the whole country. So it's quite a surprise for me and for my colleagues, for everybody. How come? If you have two different authorities, meaning that economically they are agreed
to decrease the level of pressure for the civilians. But they still like the investments. They still like the strong institutions which will help the people to benefit all of those energy resources and the beauties the country has. From the tourism perspectives, before the revolution, it was very much attractive countries. Yes, there was a dictatorship. There was a dictator who, let's say, occupied most of the institutionals and other parts, directions in a country. But still, people were not afraid to go to Libya. And because of stereotypes, now the number of tourists is very limited. And I will say, when we applied for visa to go to Libya, I realized that we are the only who are traveling to that destination. Being there, I asked if there are some more journalists or, let's say, tourists who are coming here, and we were saying that we are the only foreign journalists who arrived to the country within the last years, meaning that all of those reports presented in the social media are being prepared by the local journalists or by those who are speaking about the country staying far beyond the borders of the state. That's why I want to say that if there will be proper investments, especially from the energy sphere, you just mentioned the Gas and Oil Forum, which gathered together the experts and representatives of the companies from not only African continents, but from the Europe as well. We could meet the Europeans and the representative of European countries, like Total, for example, a French company, or BP, who are willing to invest in Libya. They want to invest, they want to get the profits, but energy resources really can help Libya to rebuild and to assure the international community that this is quite a safe place. The money which the country will get from the exploration and export of the resources should be, I think, reinvested first to the security sphere, to remove any kind of limitations on the roads. Despite the secure atmosphere which we could observe in Tripoli, when you're going far away from the capital, you can see that there are some malicious groups and who are uncontrolled. They are not controlled by the east or west. They have their own power, and that brings some complications, and that also creates some problems for tourists or other people who wish to go there. They should hire someone, security, to follow them everywhere. But it's very bad for tourism destinations and for the investors. So getting money from energy explorations and export, first I think the government should definitely invest in a security sphere, and that will bring more and more people to come and investigate the investigated Libya.
And despite the challenges, you talked there the example of the farmers. It's not the case that there's a complete lack of trust in all the established institutions, is it? There are relatively sophisticated supply chains working between two different regions with different governance structures. So there is the beginnings of some foundations there that investors, I guess, should find relatively encouraging.
Yes, that means the journalists and the authorities themselves should spread more information about the possibilities, opportunities. Let's say the tourists are willing to go there, or the investors, from where they can get more detailed information. It's not about embassy. Of course, embassy can play a very important role, but there is no Libya's embassy in every single part of the world. And we cannot forget that politically the country is divided. Therefore, each part of this country has its own truths. Benghazi will definitely promote its own truths, trying to attract more investors to come there. And Tripoli, officially recognized government by the United Nations, they will try to make sure that more people are coming to Tripoli and the area controlled by the Eastern government. Therefore, what is visible there is that economic institutions and private owners and the farmers should also have a close coordination. So if you are a private investor, if you are the farmer, let's say, or the entrepreneur, and you have enough financial resources, you can, let's say, have your own factory, as we were able to visit one private factory producing the dairy, milks, yogurt, and etc. Of course, for them, it's more easy to work inside the government. But the ordinary civilians, the farmers who do not get any kind of support from the government, they face some troubles. And there is no concrete institutions who can help them. It's more about privacy. So they could apply for a tender, they can wait some time, and then probably after some improvements, it will take some months even. Then also, of course, liquidity of money. because after the Gaddafi's regime fell down, there were inflation, and now it's quite difficult time for, still very difficult time for some civilians who are willing to work in the business sphere. Therefore, I guess, but I would like to mention one thing. What really surprised me, two things. The first, the cost of the same product should be the same in all Libya. Doesn't matter where it's being sold, in Benghazi, in Tripoli, or somewhere else. And then I ask a logical question. What if any of the owners of the shop or business may decide to increase the price of a product, let's say a chocolate, for example? And I was answering that in that case, people will not go to that shop. They will not purchase the goods, and the owner will lose everything. Therefore, it's controlled. And the second very important issues are all of those products that are being imported from other countries. And the main countries who are selling the products is Turkey and China. So we also visited the free zone in Misrata, very important free trade zone for eastern part of the Libya, and we were explained how the cooperation is happening with different countries. They do expect more products to come and to be exported in the near future, but as for now, Turkey and China are the main countries who are selling the products. All taxes which is being imposed on the imported products are being covered by the government. So people, the populations, they do not need to overpay the price to cover the taxes what is being paid by the government. It's really surprised me a lot in a country like Libya.
Yeah, that is very unexpected. And I think a lot of people, as you say, would be surprised to hear precisely how the country is kind of reforming itself almost.
There are a lot of opportunities if the government continue to work in the past, how it's doing that. Of course, we met someone who are still dissatisfied by the reforms and by the political and economic environment in the country. I wouldn't say that everybody's happy with what's happening there. So much more work to be done. But as for now, I can say that there are a lot of opportunities for investors and for the government.
And let's talk about one of those obvious opportunities, being energy.
Yeah.
What is the message coming out of Tripoli and Benghazi at the moment to potential major investors or to other countries like China, like Turkey, that already have established relationships? Is it something along the lines of, look, we've got this tremendous potential, these natural energy reserves, you're going to need to invest a little bit in some infrastructure and some supply chain support to help us realize that energy potential. But essentially, there's a huge opportunity here for people to come in and partner.
Well, I guess it's not a news for everybody that Libya has the biggest oil reserves in the African continent. And it was attractive for everybody since the time of Gaddafi and after. So even some experts are saying openly that Western intervention was also followed by the interest of the superpowers to control the oil reserves in this country. And now, yes, you're right, the countries like Turkey, also Italy, has very close energy ties with Tripoli.
Well, historic relationship, of course, with the country.
Yes, of course, and even Russia. Russia, it has its strong presence in Benghazi, but still there are Russians who are in Tripoli. And they are using their own contacts, their own, let's say, investments to make sure that they are own any part of energy, I would say, partnership agreements with the government to first, of course, cover their own needs, but at the same time, it's a part of investment policy which helped to Libya to rebuild. We had a chance to speak with the oil minister during that conference, and we were surprised to know that Libya, Tripoli specifically, has its infrastructure to produce around 11 BCM cubic meter of gas per day, and right now they are operating at probably 20%. So for the future, if they do have a proper infrastructure and investments, there are huge opportunities for Africa itself and for Europe, because Europe needs oil and gas. But due to the instability in Libya, they cannot use this resources because of sanctions, because of some limitations, because of arms embargo, and etc. But just imagine how much it will help Europe and other countries. And openly, Libyans are saying that we do need to work with Europe, with the United States, with Russia. They do not follow any political, let's say, situation on a global stage, any divisions or, let's say, conflict in between of like Russia and United States, trade war between United States and China. They do not intervene to these political dialogues.
I was going to ask you about that because that's very interesting, I think, because in a way that they've been out of many geopolitical arguments, conflicts, disagreements over the years, in a way that could play to their advantage. And do you get a sense that within Libya that there's a sort of an open-mindedness towards who they partner with, you know, how they partner, that actually that they're not, that they haven't been afflicted by disagreements, conflicts, prejudices of the past?
To be honest, they think about their own interests. They are willing to work with every single country who can invest, because it can be, Libya itself is trying to position the possibilities within the scope of its territory as a northern gate to the Africa, through the transport links, energy communications, and any other projects which will definitely benefit Libya itself. You know, going to Tripoli, I was asking myself, like, well, officially it's like Turkey has its strong presence in the cooperation with Tripoli and Russia more with Benghazi. But I was surprised to see so many Russians in Tripoli. And I also know that Turkish government has its own context with Benghazi, meaning that Libya itself never put any divisions in between. And asking the question who you wish to work more intensively in the near future, they say Turkey, because they really appreciate the position of Turkish government since 2019, especially when there was very tough escalation in between of East and West, and when Haftar almost reached Tripoli. Then it was Turkey who helped Tripoli to stabilize the situation, to make sure that Haftar do not take control over full Libya, and the country has its own possibility to rebuild the economy. Turkey is one of the key investors. Turkish companies has many contracts with Tripoli, and they do rely on Turkey in its security concern for the future. Therefore, they have a lot of expectations, officials and also civilians whom we asked, who do you want to see more presence here? They said it's Turkey. Turkey is not so far from us. We really wish to cooperate in energy sphere and political sphere and economic sphere, and we still rely on Turkey as the main guarantor of stability and security within our region.
Anastasia, in terms of that stability and the perception of stability vis-a-vis potential investors, is there any is there any worry at all about the slight separation between Tripoli and Benghazi?
Yes, of course people want to have secure government. When we ask them, whom do you want to see as let's say your president or your ruler of your country, they say first and the most point for us is the security. We need someone to unite Libya, to make sure that we can easily travel across the country. We do not want to care about security because we want it to be taken as granted. For farmers, for others, it's very important to have investors, and investment means stability and security. Therefore, there were even some calls in their answers for our questions. They said, like, we call the international community to pay more attention to Libya, first for investments, second for economic development, energy perspectives, and stability. They need the organizations like the United Nations or, let's say, European Union to see and consider Libya as a reliable partner for the future who can also help to stabilize the internal political division within the country.
Anastasia, we thank you as always, fascinating, and we know that A News viewers will have much more content from your trip to Tripoli coming very, very soon on the channel. So thank you very much. Okay, after the break, we take a closer look at why Hungary is set to lose more than €1 billion in EU funding. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Prime Time. Hungary is facing the permanent loss of more than €1 billion in EU funding by the end of this year, after failing to meet Brussels' deadlines on corruption safeguards and rule of law reforms. Now, the funds will now expire. Our correspondent Pablo Gutierrez has the very latest from Budapest.
Well, that's right, Guy. This loss is now unavoidable. By the end of the year, Hungary will permanently forfeit just over €1 billion in EU cohesion funds. No matter what steps are taken next, this money can no longer be claimed and will return to the EU central budget. Now, the funds were intended for domestic development projects, including regional infrastructure and support for small and medium-sized businesses. But EU budget rules require that money allocated for a given year be claimed within a fixed deadline, which is set to expire at the end of this month. Now, at the center of the disputes are corruption risks and concerns over transparency in public spending here in Hungary. In late 2022, the European Commission froze around €18 billion earmarked for Hungary, citing weaknesses in rule of law and oversight mechanisms. Of the total €6.3 billion in cohesion funds that remain blocked under the EU's conditional procedure. Now, Brussels says the requirements are clear. The Commission is calling for concrete steps to strengthen anti-corruption safeguards and revise transparency laws. Without those changes, the funds will stay frozen. Now, as a result, nearly 1/3 of the EU development funds earmarked for Hungary will be lost permanently, even if future governments, listen to this, move quickly to pass the required legislation. Now, the risk extends beyond cohesion funding. Hungary is also entitled to about €10.4 billion from the EU's post-pandemic recovery fund, but access to that money is blocked until key reform milestones are met. EU institutions warn the rule of law situation in Hungary continues to worsen, and recent reports place Hungary at the bottom of the EU on rule of law standards, while some surveys show strong public support for tying EU funds to legal safeguards. Now, the loss of more than €1 billion stands as a clear financial consequence of Hungary's ongoing dispute with Brussels over corruption and the rule of law.
Well, joining me now in the studio to discuss this further is Jan Kasper, a researcher at Mateusz Corvinus Collegium in Budapest, Hungary. Mr. Kasper, thank you very much for joining us on PrimeTime. Is Hungary being punished, do you think? Is this a way of chastising Budapest for daring to think differently?
Good evening, and thanks for the invitation. Yes, actually, I think that the answer to your question is already in your question. This is not about the rule of law. This is not about corruption. This is clearly a politically motivated decision. And actually in Brussels, the European Commission or Manfred Weber, the leader of the main group in the European Parliament, are not hiding the fact anymore that they are acting in a political way against the government of Viktor Orban. And what they want is actually a regime change, a government change in April, because next elections are in April 2026 in Hungary, and they are openly supporting the candidate of the opposition, which is fine. I mean, everyone has the right to have his political opinion about the developments in the world, but they are always hiding this or trying to hide this behind keywords like the rule of law or the corruptions or milestones, etc. Look, the best example for this is a similar case that happened 2 years ago in Poland. You know, in Poland, during years, the European Commission and the Parliament was asking the conservative government to change a lot of things in their judiciary systems, etc. And the Polish government at that time accepted the rules of the games and they changed everything. But the Commission always came up with new conditions, and actually the money was transferred once a new and a completely pro-EU Prime Minister was in office, Donald Tusk. Within 24 hours, he got the money. So from the point of view of the government, it's completely clear this is a political blackmail.
So the political side then is one element. What about the economic aspect? How significant a loss potentially is this amount of money to Hungary?
That's a pretty high amount. You know, Hungary is a small country with a small economy. It's highly dependent on foreign investments, especially coming from Germany. So of course, everyone in Hungary would be happier if they had this money and the economy would run better. But I want to highlight the fact that that's not the main problem that Hungary has to face economy right now. It's much wider. We had to put things in context, and the European Union, the European economy has a huge problem of competitiveness. It's in decline. As I mentioned, the Hungarian economy is dependent on the German industry. We know that the results of the German industry are not good this last few years. So there is almost a structural problem in this declining European economy, and I would say that this matter of frozen EU funds that are being frozen since years now with the political approach and motivation, this becomes more and more a secondary problem. And the main problem that we have in Hungary is the fact that the European Union as a whole is economically sick.
So it's not about rule of law standards. I mean, you would refute that. What is the strategy, though, in Brussels about what it wants the effect of this to be? Is part of it a message to other countries, do you think, Slovakia, others, saying to them, look, you know, this could be coming your way if you're to think about sort of stepping out of line in some way politically?
I think that you are perfectly right. Hungary is a testing ground, is a way to show others that if they cross certain lines on migration, on the narrative concerning the war between Russia and Ukraine, on the definition of family, etc., they will be sanctioned. You know, it comes in a pretty interesting context. Even Politico wrote an article, I think, two days ago. Now we cannot deny the fact that the political forces that think similarly to Viktor Orban are stronger and stronger. I mean, they are almost at 40% in France. In Germany, it's 30%. We can see that in France, the government is very weak. Emmanuel Macron doesn't have any majority to govern the country since almost 2 years now. Friedrich Merz, who wants to endorse the leading role within the European Union, has a huge problem within with his coalition, and the people in Germany are being very upset, especially in the eastern part of the country. So of course that in Brussels, they understand that something very deep is changing, and they try to put political milestones, not milestones related to the rule of law, political milestones to say, look, if you do the same as Hungary, then you will be sanctioned in the same way.
As you say, something fundamental across Europe does seem to be changing. All sorts of challenges within that, all sorts of tectonic plates shifting, if you like. Whilst that's happening, and understanding the background that there's been between Budapest and Brussels, how do Hungary and the EU, how do they come to any sort of sensible understanding to sort of coexist in a vaguely positive way over the next couple of years?
It's difficult to answer these questions. What we can see again, the way that some of leaders are acting in Brussels, it's really undermining the legitimacy of the whole European integration. So I think that in Brussels, at a certain point, they will understand that their behavior is actually destroying decades of efforts and decades of support to the European condition. And I'm saying this as someone who is convinced about the necessity to have a deep European Commission. Rules are existing and they are always violating those rules. So actually there is a huge problem with the rule of law, but in Brussels, because they are acting above their competencies by always trying to find solutions. For example, you can see this on the using of the Russian frozen assets, where you have a huge lack of legal basis. This is very dangerous, and it could have a huge impact on the European monetary system. I mean, who is going to invest its money from the Gulf countries or from Asia into Europe if we do what they are preparing to do now this week? The European summit of this week in Brussels is highly important from this point of view. So I think that at a certain point, the European leaders are going to understand that they went too far, and in order to save a compromise on this European integration, they need to understand that from a political point of view, the legitimacy and the democratic legitimacy is still at the national level.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Mr. Orban, he obviously has very great issues with Brussels, but there is an established economic ties to many different European countries. Germany, you mentioned, being one of them. What is his strategy for countries like that? Germany, for example. Is he hoping for a change of government in Germany? Has he got a plan, a strategy to continue to develop economic partnerships despite the fact that Germany is a key part of the EU?
Germany is still the leading economy in Europe, and one of the main economic and trade partners, Hungary. So that's key. Important that we maintain very good ties with the Germans, with the companies, because with the German government became very difficult in the last period. But since more than 10 years now, the Hungarian government started an Eastern partnerships, with countries in Asia, etc. So the government, the Hungarian leaders understood that something was brewing, that the world is shifting, changing, and there is a huge need to diversify the Hungarian partnerships. It's also true in the energy sector. For example, countries from Central Asia and from the South Caucasus, Azerbaijan, are playing a huge role in order to diversify the Hungarian energy supplying, because, as you may know, Hungary is a landlocked country, and it's very difficult to have an independent policy from this point of view.
Mr. Kasper, fascinating stuff. We thank you very much indeed for your analysis.
Thank you.
After the break, we check in with our correspondents all around the world for the very latest developments in their regions. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Primetime. Now let's check in with our correspondents around the world for the latest developments in their regions. And we start in Great Britain, where the head of the Secret Intelligence Service warns that Russia is using tactics short of full-scale war to intimidate Britain and its allies. Zainab Farazada has more.
Russia is trying to bully, fearmonger and manipulate the UK and its allies through attacks that stop short of all-out war. That warning comes from the new head of MI6, speaking publicly for the first time. Blaise Mitrovoli, who is the first woman to lead the Secret Intelligence Service, says Britain is now operating in a space between peace and war, where the front line is no longer fixed to a battlefield, but exists everywhere. Speaking at MI6 headquarters in London, she accused Vladimir Putin of deliberately dragging out peace negotiations with Ukraine, while continuing his military campaign, warning that Kiev's fate is central not just to European security, but to global stability. Mrs. Mitrovoli said Russia is increasingly using so-called grey zone tactics, cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, drones near airports and military bases, aggressive activity at sea, and state-backed arson and sabotage. She also warned that information itself is being weaponized, with disinformation spread online to deepen divisions and erode trust within societies. The MI6 chief said the world is more dangerous now than it has been for decades, with new technologies from artificial intelligence to quantum computing, shifting power away from states and making global security more unpredictable. While MI6 is adapting to these threats, she stressed that the public also has a role to play, especially in spotting false information online and questioning emotionally charged content. Her message was clear: this is not a temporary phase, and in today's security environment, the frontline is everywhere. Zaina Farizadeh in News, Manchester.
To Central Asia now, and Kazakhstan is exploring ways to expand its role in regional energy projects, including a potential entry into one of Central and South Asia's most complex gas initiatives. Talks are underway with Turkmenistan over possible cooperation on a cross-border pipeline and upstream assets. Our correspondent Fariza Kalamazina has the details.
Kazakhstan is signaling interest in major gas projects in Turkmenistan as talks continue over possible participation in the Tapi gas pipeline, one of the region's most ambitious energy initiatives. According to Kazakhstan's energy ministry, the national gas company Kazakhgas remains in negotiations with Turkmenistan state energy group Turkmengas on the joint construction of the Turkmenistan-Afghanistan-Pakistan-India pipeline. Discussions also include potential cooperation on the Galkanish gas field, one of the largest natural gas reserves in the world. The ministry says the talks are confidential. Kazakhstan has previously indicated it's considering becoming a shareholder in the project. Energy Minister Erlan Akundzenov has confirmed that the country is ready to acquire up to a 30% stake. And Kazakhgas has submitted its proposal and is now awaiting a response from the Turkmen side. The scale of the project explains why progress remains cautious. Galkanish is a supergiant field, and its development involves complex negotiations and long-term commitments. The Tapi pipeline is designed to stretch more than 1,800 kilometers, transporting up to 33 billion cubic meters of gas a year from Turkmenistan through Afghanistan to Pakistan and India. And so far, only the Turkmen section has been completed, while authorities in Ashgabat announced the start of construction in Afghanistan last year. Despite being officially launched in 2015, the project has seen limited progress. Also, security risks along the Afghan transit route remain a key concern, while uncertainty over gas pricing continues to weigh on negotiations. And for Kazakhstan, potential involvement in Tapi would represent a strategic move towards South Asian gas markets. But for now, the project remains a long-term regional ambition instead of a near-term reality. Fariza Kalimurzyna, Almaty, A-News.
And concerns in Kabul after the UK has issued a fresh warning to its citizens advising against all travel to Afghanistan, citing serious security risks across the country. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis now has more from the country's capital.
The Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office says the situation has become even more dangerous in recent weeks, particularly along the Durand Line, the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Officials point to recent clashes in the area, with many routes and border crossings now closed, making travel unpredictable and, in some cases, impossible. The advisory also warns that British nationals could face detention if they enter Afghanistan. And, crucially, the UK authorities say its ability to help anyone in trouble there is extremely limited, with no in-person consular support available inside the country. The UK's warning comes as part of a broader international consensus. Earlier this year, the United States Department of State placed Afghanistan under a level 4 do not travel advisory, the highest warning level. The US cited terrorism, civil unrest, crimes, as well as risks of kidnapping and wrongful detention. Australia has also issued similar advice, telling its citizens not to travel to Afghanistan due to what it describes as extremely dangerous security conditions, including the threat of terrorism and abductions. And Canada too warned against all travels earlier this year, pointing to ongoing violence, arbitrary arrests, and the lack of reliable consular support on the ground. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi arrived in Moscow on Tuesday for high-level talks with Russian officials following a one-day visit to Minsk, where he met Belarus's Foreign Minister, President and the Secretary of the State Security Council. Toraz Shiralilo has the details.
Iran's top diplomat Abbas Araghchi left Minsk for Moscow on Tuesday after a one-day stay in the Belarusian capital, during which he held discussions with Foreign Minister, Chief Executive and the country's top security official. Araghchi and his Belarusian counterpart Maxim Ryzhenkov signed 3 bilateral cooperation documents on Monday regarding strengthening the role of international law in international relations, as well as cooperation program of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Iran and Belarus from 2026 to 2030. At the conclusion of his visit, Iranian Foreign Minister told reporters in Minsk that the meetings with Belarusian officials were frank, positive and constructive. Araghchi submitted invitation of the Secretary of Supreme National Security Council of Iran, Ali Larijani, to his Belarusian counterpart to visit Tehran after exchanging views with him on security issues and regional developments. It was also agreed that Belarusian Minister of Transport will visit Iran in the near future to further cooperation in the field of transit and international transportation. In Moscow, Araghchi is scheduled to meet with high-ranking officials, including Chairman of State Duma Vyacheslav Volodin, on Tuesday. Russian Foreign Ministry has confirmed the meeting between Araghchi and Sergei Lavrov will be held on Wednesday. It said in a statement that the two foreign ministers will discuss bilateral issues in the wake of the Comprehensive Strategic Treaty, which entered into force in October 2025, international developments, and Iran's civilian nuclear program. They will also exchange views on regional developments of mutual interest. Toraz Shiralilo, Tehran, A News.
Let's take a look at other news now. In Iraq, farmers are increasingly turning to groundwater to save their wheat crops as river levels drop to historic lows. With drought deepening, authorities have imposed strict water limits and mandated artificial irrigation, but rising costs and saline wells are pushing some farmland out of use.
Iraq's wheat farms are increasingly relying on groundwater as river levels drop to historic lows, forcing farmers to adopt modern irrigation methods to keep crops alive. In southern Basra province, sprinklers draw water from wells, including saline groundwater, to irrigate wheat fields.
As for agriculture in desert regions, the most important thing is that the water is suitable. Agricultural water with salinity levels of 1,000 to 1,500, 2,000 for wheat is excellent, but it is the cost.
In central provinces such as Najaf, farmers say groundwater is either too saline or sulphurous, leaving land uncultivated.
This agricultural land in the districts of and surrounding Najaf, wells will not succeed in it. Farmers cannot benefit from them, and these lands will not be cultivated.
The Agriculture Ministry has capped river-irrigated wheat and made modern irrigation mandatory under a two-phase plan.
The plan for it was on groundwater and well water, combined with the use of modern irrigation technologies. This covered 3.5 million dunams.
Officials warn that increased reliance on wells is already reducing groundwater levels across the country. The United Nations says Iraq is experiencing one of the most severe droughts in decades, with both rain-fed and irrigated agriculture affected nationwide.
Iraq is facing one of the most severe droughts that has been observed over decades. The rain-fed and irrigated agriculture are directly affected nationwide.
Iraq's Agriculture Ministry says the current planting season is proceeding under strict water rationing, as reduced river flows and falling groundwater levels continue to limit the area that can be cultivated.
And before we go, let's bring you the latest from Australia, where the country is still coming to terms with a deadly attack at Sydney's Bondi Beach. 15 people were killed on Sunday, with thousands gathering at vigils across the country this evening. National leaders have now agreed to tighten gun laws. Here's more.
Two alleged gunmen who attacked a Hanukkah event at Sydney's Bondi Beach had travelled to the Philippines before the assault, which killed 15 people and appeared to be inspired by Islamic State, police said on Tuesday. The attack on Sunday was Australia's worst mass shooting in nearly 30 years and is being investigated as an act of terrorism targeting the Jewish community. Israel's ambassador to Australia, Amir Maimon, visited the site, joining residents in paying tribute to the victims and those injured.
My heart is torn apart because the Jewish community, the Australians of Jewish faith, the Jewish community is also my community, my people.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said that the incident appeared to be motivated by Islamic State ideology. Islamic State-linked networks are known to operate in the Philippines. He also said his government would consider strengthening gun laws.
We need to examine the gun laws that were carried in the wake of the 1996 Port Arthur massacre. This is different from Port Arthur, though. Port Arthur was someone engaged in random violence against people. This is targeted. This is ideologically driven, and therefore is a different form of hatred and atrocity.
During his visit to the hospital, Prime Minister praised Ahmed Al-Ahmed, who tackled one of the attackers during the shooting, calling his actions an example of courage and resilience, and confirmed the man is scheduled to undergo further surgery. The incident, classified as a terrorist attack, occurred when hundreds of people had gathered on the beach to mark the first day of Hanukkah. Around 40 people were taken to hospital, including 2 police officers. There are 24 patients still receiving care in several Sydney hospitals. 3 remain in critical conditions. Authorities identified the suspects as Sajid Akram and his son Naveed Akram. Investigators said the father had legally held a firearms licence since 2015 and owned 6 licensed weapons. The attack is the deadliest gun incident in Australia in almost 3 decades.
Well, that does bring us to the end of Prime Time. Please do join us tomorrow evening for plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here at A News, thanks for watching.